I'll call the meeting to order. Thank you. Let me catch my breath.
Yeah.
I think I ran a 3-minute mile last 2 blocks. Anyway, welcome to the April Finance Committee meeting. And we will start with the consent agenda as I get it out. Bear with me. Does anyone have anything to pull? We'll start with Mr. Montgomery.
C1, C7, and C11.
C1, C7, and C11. Ms. Burke, did you have some?
C1.
C1?
1.
C1, okay.
C3.
C3. And bear with the chairman a
Chairman,
second.
could I get C2, please?
C2. Molly, you got anything, Jeff?
Anything left?
Let's pull them all.
C2 I had. I'm going to pull C5.
I'm sorry. C9.
C9.
And there's a reason you'll see.
Okay.
Raise you.
If there are no other, I move for approval of the balance.
Second.
Wait a minute.
Oh, we
I
gotta
had
wait on you.
C9. Hey,
You got
wait,
one.
wait.
Okay.
That's... Yeah. I'm going to pull C. C12. Is there a motion to
Anything
approve what's
that's
left?
So move.
Second.
Second. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed likewise.
I scratched that one off my list.
Yeah. Folks, we may be here a while because normally the consent items are done quickly, but since I have 2, 4, 5, 6, 7, 9 of them pulled, we'll start with C1, please. You can read that one.
Resolution approving the fiscal year 2015 Housing and Community Development Program and authorizing submission of the 2014-2015 annual plan to the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development.
Okay. Ms. Burke, you had a question or comment?
Yes, and I believe Mr. Montgomery
Yeah.
has one. The question I have, I would like for Mr. Brooks to discuss this a little bit. We've been giving assistance to these groups for quite some time, and in the beginning, when we started with some of the groups, we asked them to get off our budget and to be able to take care of themselves. And so I just need him to review that, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Mr. Brooks, would you like to comment on this item?
Yes, good afternoon, Chairman, members of the committee, Mr. Mayor. Before you is the Community Development Consolidated Plan for 14-15 and the action plan for this coming year. And the question pertains to the sub-grantee agreements where we had solicited proposals for nonprofits for funding various different types of public service projects.
Yes.
Because under the community development program, 15% of your allocation plus program income can be used for public service activities. So we presented you with a list of the organizations that submitted funds, recommended the request, the actual request, and the recommendation and the source of funds. And we were asked to provide the number of years that any one agency had been funded. And you can see several of them have been funded for over 20 years, ranging down to those that haven't received any funding at all. But there are several that have ranged from 12 to 20 years for some period of time. Now, Habitat for Humanities, they are the city's designated CHODO.
Designated what again?
Showed it.
What's the acronym?
Word.
It's an acronym for what?
Community Development Housing Organization.
That's what I was going to
And
get.
we're required to work with one.
Yeah.
So they have been getting funds based on that basis, and from my understanding, in past years, they were the only organization that was certified as a CHODO. We have discussed looking at some other organizations because we are working with some new groups that can become CHODOs, and what we intend to do in the upcoming year is to look at utilizing some of the other groups, or at least one other group, as a CHODO, which would still be involved with housing development and using them along with Habitat.
Okay. Ms. Burke, continue.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Brooks, to the members of this committee and the mayor and council people sitting here. We have made some develop a habit. We can just come to the city and we'll be able to get this. I don't think it's right to have one person's designated, one agency as a CHODO. I think we have been a little complacent because what we should have done, as this council has said, as well as the mayor on instances, we need to review, Mr. City Manager. We need to review what we have and then ever so often go back and monitor it. So my question would be, in asking, and I've said to the chairman and the vice chairman, I feel that you need to be visiting some of these agencies, speaking directly as our chairman and vice chair of our finance committee, and we need to look at them and let them know this is a habit they need to break, and we need to find out if there's some other agencies where they're getting some funding. And the question to Mr. Brooks, not today, but you need to be able to answer in taking them off. Are we the only ones who's helping them? Because with the economy like it is, I want us to understand this. We cannot continue to carry folks. If there are other agencies that they can go and get some funding, then I feel they need to try those agencies. So, Mr. Chairman and Vice Chair, I and members of this committee, the mayor and other council people, I have voiced my concerns. And I know Mr. Montgomery has some also, and maybe his could be added to mine.
I'm going to let him speak next. Mr. Montgomery, you also asked this before.
I did, and I have several particular questions. I see we do funding on here, and I see specific to the Bethesda Center. Did we do any funding with the Samaritan Ministries? Did we put any money in any of the project that they're doing now? I know it's not included in this, but did we participate? Did they request anything?
Yes, Samaritan Ministries, if you look down in the second section, for
Third section.
second and third.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Emergency shelter grant funds.
Yeah, they're
Okay,
there.
I missed that. But then in terms of their actual,
Capital.
their capital project, did we participate in that?
Not that I'm aware of.
Yeah, we did. I thought we did, yeah.
Okay, I was just wanted to have questions.
Can
on
we
that.
get that information back? I know we did, and because I would say that building's a third finished by now.
The other question goes back to the actual allocations of the dollars specifically, and in the area of the housing rehabilitation and purchase rehab dollars that'll be spent. I think it's on page 34. Will those dollars, is that through the city program, or or is that dollars expended with partnership with other agencies?
On page 34.
So,
Yeah, 34 just outlines the dollar wise.
The funds that would be spent within the city organization.
Okay. And then getting to the actual agency requests here. With this action, those specific agencies that are listed here at this time, when we do this and it goes to council, that'll be the specific approval for allocations to these agencies.
Yes, sir.
From these funds. And within the requests that they have for these funds, what are the things that we require them to provide to the city in terms of for their request? Do we require any financial information, any documents, any of their budgeting, any of that information to understand the organization itself and the financial states of those organizations?
Yes, there's a thorough review of their financial condition. We look at other funds that they're leveraging, prior work that they have done. So there is a review, an internal staff review on the work, and then the panel will review the application itself and the proposal, which includes much of what you've just mentioned.
And I know we talked about how long some of these agencies have been funded. What's the source of the funds in which we are allocating here?
The source of the funds we're using here would be community development block grant funds, home funds, housing finance, and emergency shelter grant. All are federal funds with the exception of the housing finance fund.
And there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, I believe, requests that are here that are not recommended for any allocation out of this. What's the reason in terms of these allocations that we did not allocate anything specific?
For the most part, some of those allocations were so large that if you look at one was 1.1 million, yet another 500,000. If we were to look at funding those through this particular process, there would be very little funds left for other agencies. So we have pulled those out, and we'll look at those separately as development projects.
Right. And one other thing that I would request prior to this coming to council is the dollars that are specifically broken up between CDBG and the Housing Finance Assistance Fund to actually show the specific amount of how much is CDBG and how much is Housing Finance Assistance Fund.
Yes, sir. We'll do that.
Ms. Adams, did you have a question?
Yes, a question and a comment. As we have come to this point, like we have done now with some other projects and initiatives the city has done, asking for what are our requirements. My question is, just like we know that CDCs and other agencies, the grants eventually run out. You know, they are entered in for X amount of time, and they're told up front that once 1 year, 3 year, 5 years, at the end of that period, but part of you receiving the grant is now you have to go find other funding or become self-sufficient. I agree with Councilmember Burke and Montgomery that I don't know whether we're doing that, but I would like to see us try to move towards that, because as we said, we can't continue to fund certain agencies, and yes, they do great work, but there comes a point where you got to be self-sufficient. And we know of agencies in our city that are self-sufficient. And I would like to see us move to that way to find out, again, are we moving in that direction? That's what I'm looking for. And for me personally, I don't know about the other members of the committee, I'd like to hold this in committee. If it is, if it's time sensitive, I saw some dates in there, May, but I guess my point was, why are we seeing this now in April? And we probably saw it somewhere, but because of the way we're moving forward and how we do business now, when it comes to the city financials, we got to be more on top of things like this. And this is not to put slant the staff. You guys are terrific with the amount of work that you have to handle and the people that you associate with and deal with and engage with. But this plan, because we're seeing pieces of information that we've asked for, such as how long have we funded them, I would like to see us hold this. And I know it's time sensitive, Chair, but I'm concerned that we're kind of...
Okay, Mr. Brooks, when do you need a decision on this?
Application is due in HUD when? The application is due in HUD May 15.
Does the committee, who's got a May calendar? When's the second committee meeting? I mean, when's the second board meeting? Because the May meeting is probably before then, but when's...
It's May 19th.
So if we moved it to the committee meeting next month, it wouldn't get to the full board till the 19th, which would be too late. Okay.
To address some of what you just talked about, Councilmember Adams, I think in part the approach that we've been using in the past can be improved upon, and I think the approach that we have been using in part doesn't allow for some of the smaller agencies that we normally don't fund to be funded because they're not really familiar with the process or know how to put these packages together. And the period that we have for the RFP is a pretty short period. So some of the changes that we have talked about making will be next year having some pre-planning workshops 4 or 5 months out where we can bring folks in and explain the process to them, let them understand what needs to be done and how to fill out the application. It's important that you fill out everything because it's a point-based system. So if you choose not to fill something out, then you get no points. So that's going to diminish your opportunity for funding. Also, just a number of your larger organizations, they are staffed much better and are familiar with doing this. So it's easier for them to go through the process. So begin to offer some technical training well enough in advance so that others can sort of have an even playing field when the time comes to submit proposals. So we've talked about doing a number of things that I think will improve this process and open it up more for various groups to be able to have an opportunity for funding.
Mr. Montgomery, do you have another comment?
I did, and actually, Mr. Brooks touched on part of what I was going to say. I met with staff about this a few weeks ago, particularly about the comp plan. Myself and Councilmember Adams attended the Community Development Academy at the School of Government, and specifically this was one of the large areas they spent a lot of time talking about. And as we discussed, there are some things I think we can do to enhance our process of engagement with community and providers in the community, because based upon numbers of individuals who came to some of those public input periods, you didn't even have some of the individuals who were receiving funding to even show up in those areas. And so it was in my mind, I thought that, well, we don't have to show up. We're guaranteed pretty much to be able to get the funding for the programs. And my other comment on it would be that for a majority of these programs, specifically we look at the homeless side of things and the things there, I think we are able to see quantitative data on the results that are happening in our community when it comes to homelessness, and the Mayor's Commission, what they've been working on. So we can see those results, but particularly the other areas, we need to be able to understand and see some actual data to show what these programs are actually doing in our community. They're designed to help individuals that are low and moderately income individuals, people who are the least likely to get the help in our community. And so how are they actually reaching that goal? And that's something I would like for us to see. How can we track that better to make sure if the federal government sending this money here to the city to do that, then are we actually accomplishing that? And if not, how do we change what we're doing to make sure the agencies understand we want to see that you're actually making the difference in changing these people's lives?
As we move forward, we'll provide to the committee a list of the recommendations that we'll make for improvements and solicit your input also.
Mr. Chairman, and I want to thank Councilman Montgomery and Adams. Some years ago, I did question the agencies. They were a little sensitive. It was not that they were not doing their work, but I felt they need to be more accountable. It just can't be business as usual. And so what we're saying today is that we're going to get a better understanding. We're going to have a different blueprint of what we need to be looking at. One thing you mentioned, Mr. Brooks, the panel. Define the panel for me when you say a panel looks at this.
A panel of city employees we select on a yearly basis to review the proposals as they come in and rate the applications and rank them.
All right.
And they make a recommendation to staff.
Mr. City Manager, I think we need to take another look at the panel, how it's make up. Absolutely. And then, of course, I will say again, I feel that this chairman of this committee and the vice chair need to take a very active forward in working with these agencies. As the vice chair said, we're not questioning the work of the city staff.
Right.
We're not even questioning these agencies. We say there's a new way we're going to do business. Absolutely. That's all. Thank you.
Can I ask a few questions?
Yes, sir.
We get this money, and most of this is community block grant money. We get that every year.
Yes, sir.
And I'm assuming the federal government has certain areas they want us to use that for?
Correct.
I see a lot of, for example, homeless shelters in here, that type of stuff.
Within the package, there are 5 specific goals, and funding pretty much coincides with those goals.
Okay. I was going to suggest that we maybe send this forward without a recommendation, since we have to get it in by a certain, and that will give us time to maybe get some additional information. I do want to put my 2 cents in. Of the organizations I know on here, and I certainly don't know them all, I think there's some very first-rate organizations, particularly we have our 2 main homeless shelters, or 3 in the Bethesda Center and Samaritan Inn, and we also have the Salvation Army one. What I don't want us to do is say, well, we'll stop funding those shelters, we'll fund some more, and the first thing you know, and this is a complaint I have with United Way, we always seem to be creating more and more organizations. And every time you create another organization, you add another development director, another executive director, and more overhead. I think we need, quite frankly, fewer, not more, organizations that are more focused. I think we had one year 12 different organizations that support veterans apply for money. And that's not to say they don't all do a good job, but I just think it's a tremendous amount of overhead repetition when you have that many. But I would recommend to the committee that we send it forward out of a recommendation, ask staff if you could get us back whatever information you can, as concise as you can, of the folks that you're approving on some type of information as far as what they do and any data they may have. to the extent we can get. And I think we probably need to put this on the agenda, Mr. City Manager, for a little more education and whatever. I mean, it's tough when we get something on, actually, it's my wife's birthday. I should remember this date. It's April the 14th, and we have to have the report in by May the 15th, and that really doesn't give us a lot of time to react.
Go ahead,
Mr. Chairman, I
before you-
have one
Okay, yes, ma'am.
concern. I would like to know, how do you go about giving the amount you give to these? What formula do you use?
Do you want that
Not
now?
now, along with the
Okay.
information.
The information you're going to send us.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
And just a note that this is just for us as we get ready to have a budget question thing on the agenda tonight. These are not the agencies that are funded from general fund dollars. So that's a whole nother section of
Yeah.
information. And I think that same information we're asking for this, to go ahead and be prepared to bring with those other agencies at that time.
Good point, because one question I did have, I did see at least one organization on here. I think ESR gets on the nonprofit list as well as this list, and it's, maybe it makes more sense for them to be on this list versus the other. I'm not picking on them. That's just an example.
Yeah, the emergency shelter grant funds are pretty pigeonholed for homelessness and
Yep.
for shelter.
Gotcha.
The greater flexibility and latitude comes in the top part with the community development
Yes,
grant.
certainly.
That's where you have a lot of flexibility in who and how much and what you want to do.
Okay. Do I hear a motion to send this forward with that recommendation?
So moved.
Is there a second? Any other comments? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed likewise. We will now go to the next item, which is C2.
Resolution authorizing additional permanent financing for a 64-unit family rental development known as Rockwood at Oliver's Crossing, located in the South Ward, in the amount of $100,000.
Before we get to this one, I believe both C2 and C3 are applying for the same grant. Is that correct?
No, they're two separate.
They're two separate?
Yeah.
Okay, then we'll take them individually. So I don't know, so many, I forgot who asked for C2, so I'll let the mayor have it. Go ahead.
Richard, just a quick question. They asked us for 200,000. You recommended 100,000. I couldn't tell exactly where the other 100,000 was coming from. If it was deferred developer fees, is that where it's coming from?
No, the additional fund, all of the additional funds would come from a repayment from the original loan that was made on a prior.
We just roll it back.
We just rolled it over. They are anticipating a very early payoff. It was a 20-year payoff.
I see.
We've been told that they intend to pay that off before the end of June, which would then allow us to take some of that fund, some of those funds, and fund this 100,000, and
Okay.
if you so choose, some other projects.
Good. Good. Thanks. I just want to make sure we had the money to
Okay,
finish
thank you.
the project.
Montgomery?
I think Councilman Clark was right in terms of C2 and C3 in the sense that both are going after the low-income tax credits. And so that would mean these dollars would only be given based upon them actually receiving the tax credits. So we're
Well-
committing to this.
The 100,000 has already been approved,
Okay.
so they're not going for any tax credits, but the other application is an application where they are applying for tax credits. It's the same agency,
Okay.
same group.
This says they're applying for low-income tax credits from North Carolina Housing Finance Agency, knowing that only one would be selected for the tax
That's in the
credits.
first,
That was back in April.
that was last year.
I remember
All
when we
right,
did
y'all
that.
go
yeah.
ahead.
Okay.
All right, I know I read it, I just was wrong. Okay.
Mr. Brooke, would you have any trouble with us putting a condition of that the other is repaid, so that way we'll be assured there's money?
Pardon?
Would you have any trouble putting a condition on the motion that says we would give them the money under the condition that they pay back the other loan, therefore we
If that's
know?
what you choose to do, I certainly wouldn't.
Okay. I think that, Mr. Mayor, I think that would
Good thing,
work your
yeah.
concern. Any other comments on C2? Is there a motion that we approve with the additional item that it is contingent upon the repayment of the prior loan?
So moved.
Second.
Okay, all in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed likewise. We will now move to C3. Who asked for this one?
It's me.
Ms. Adams asked for this one.
Yes. Does she need to read it?
Oh, please read that. I'm sorry, I skipped that before.
Resolution authorizing permanent financing for a 62-unit family rental development known as Ember Ridge Apartments, located in the North Ward, in the amount of $600,000.
Okay, Ms. Adams.
Thank you. What I'm going to ask is that we pull this one and keep it in committee. I don't know, Mr. Brooks, if it's time sensitive, but there's some issues and some conversations that still need to be held. I attended the developers meeting that they had with the community of Chatham behind where this development is proposed to go. It was very interesting. And the community itself is planning on having a community meeting either this week or next week. And I also plan to have a meeting. There's some conversations that need to be worked out, so I'd like to pull this.
Okay,
off the
and I believe this is the item that we have gotten a number of emails concerning the egress through the property. Is this correct?
Correct.
There's a rezoning case coming through planning for the same property, which is,
Oh, okay, so that's why we've got in those emails.
This is another one of those applications that's due in by May, the middle of May. And what they're requesting, of course, is a commitment for financing. So if that is postponed and they aren't receiving a response to that, the application would go in without any support from the city.
Okay, but who's financing it? I thought they just wanted a city's letter, just junk. Mr.
yeah.
Page, you got your hand up.
I have a suggestion for Councilwoman Adams, if this works for you, Councilwoman Adams. There is a rezoning case coming on May the 5th, I believe.
I know.
If you would like, what we could do is let it go through committees now, either with or without a recommendation, but actually hold this item and not bring it until after the zoning case has been decided on May the 5th. Then you can decide on this item after that item has been decided upon.
I would agree to that.
Okay. Could you answer my question? I was reading this, and it's been a few days, that they were simply looking for our endorsement of the project.
It would be a commitment for providing funding.
Are we funding?
Yes.
Is it short-term or long-term funding?
Long-term, 20 years. But that's generally the term that we've been using on these.
That's the
tax credit
$600,000 requested city mortgage
That's
loan.
correct.
All right? Yes, sir.
And there are,
Yeah.
if you recall, in the past, we may have only had one or two applications going in,
Yeah.
but this time there's a possibility of several being submitted from Forsyth County, and if we provide commitment letters for 1, 2, 3, 4, then we're on the hook for those funds.
What's the chances they would all be approved? Because are they all competing for the federal tax credit and all that? Okay.
Don't you only get
I
one
was going to say, didn't we get one?
typically you get one.
per area? Because I,
One.
I see someone in the back, Hannah, would you like to come up? You might, please come to the microphone. Just thanks. If you could give us your name and address, and you may have some light to shed on this. Go ahead.
Thank you. I'm Amy Lanning. I'm an attorney at Blanco Tackaberry, and we represent Bradley Housing Developers and Halcon Development, who has put in this request. And our address is 110 South Stratford Road here in Winston, and thank you for taking the time to consider this today. The first question about the timing, as they mentioned, the applications are due to the North Carolina Housing Finance Agency for the low-income housing tax credits on May 15th, and we must have all commitment letters in by that date. So as far as the timing goes for committees and the decision, we respectfully request that those dates be kept in mind. As far as the number of applications, I believe you have one other on the agenda today, and there's another representative for that developer here. That's your next item on the agenda. That's also requesting funding for this cycle. And last year, in the QAP, which is the plan that dictates how the low-income housing tax credit is run here in North Carolina, there was only one award per county allowed, at least for Forsyth County, and so there was only the possibility there could be one award in Forsyth County. This year, they moved Forsyth County to the metro section, and so this year there could be up to two awarded in Forsyth County, to answer the second question.
And I believe item 2, which we've already voted on, was the one that got it last year.
That was
right?
from last year, so that's completely separate.
Okay. And we did have 2 or 3 apply that year, if I'm not mistaken.
And we can, but there can only be one awarded in Forsyth County last year. This year there could be
Could
two.
be up to 2. Okay. Any
That's
questions
correct.
for our attorney? Thank you very much. If you'll hang around in case we have
Okay,
other questions.
thank you.
Ms. Montgomery, you had a comment?
yes, two things now. As I mentioned before, the Community Development Academy that we attended, the representative from the Housing Finance agency was there. And I was critical to the representatives there, as I will be now, particularly about low-income housing or moderate-income housing being located on the outskirts of cities, away from the resources that many of individuals that live there will need, that we need to keep in mind the effect that has. I know there's certain things that they look at, you have to be in certain proximity to certain things, but the fact of the location of some of those, to me, is just something to be interested in. And that goes to the point on the item that we're going to hold in committee here. And nobody in any of those emails we looked at, and I'll bring it up at the next time we discuss this as well, but to me it seems less of a true concern about traffic and more of a concern about this being a low or moderate income housing project. And to me, I specifically think that housing and affordable housing needs to exist in an array of places in our city, regardless of you believing whether or not it should be close to your neighborhood, because at the end of the day, it's going to be close to somebody's neighborhood, and we have to be cognizant of the fact that affordable housing should exist in various places in our city, and I just want council to keep that in mind as we discuss items pertaining to affordable housing.
Ms. Burke.
Mr. Chairman, you bring up a good point, but if we go back and look at public-private housing, we started in this community some years ago. One concern was having too many housing in the inner city. So what we were looking at then with developers and people, let's take people who are on low income, put them in an area that's not into the inner city. So some of those nice, interesting things that they would be enhanced by. So that was one, and so we could look at that again about what you're talking about, being able to get to places because people don't have cars and transportation to get there.
Okay. I think Mr. Page had a good idea. If we could maybe make a motion to send this forward without recommendation to the May 5th meeting. Obviously, if in the zoning, I think has to do, well, there's some, again, egress issues about another neighborhood. And then depending on the outcome of that, we would have this after that, and then we could address both of them at the same time. That gives you time to have your meetings.
Absolutely. So vote.
Second.
All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed likewise. That is, and for the attorney, where'd she go? I can't see you. Okay. We have sent this forward without recommendation. Normally, it would go to the second meeting of the month, but it's going to the first meeting, which is our zoning meeting. It would be the first Monday in May the 5th, and we will consider this after they consider the zoning issue. And Ms. Adams, as mentioned earlier, is going to have some community meetings, so you might want to find out when those are taking place. Okay, thank you. Believe it or not, C4 was approved. C5. I think, oh, please read this one.
Consideration of items related to the Liberty Street Vendors Market located in the Northeast Ward. Resolution approving an agreement with the Housing Authority of Winston-Salem to share in the cost of installing a fence at the Liberty Street Vendors Market. And B, ordinance amending the project budget ordinance for the City of Winston-Salem for the fiscal year 2013-2014.
I actually had this one for. I want you to comment on it. I drive by this regularly. It's a great-looking facility, but I wish we were using it every weekend. So I guess I'm kind of looking for a status. And then specific to this, can you kind of describe where the fence is going and what the fence is going to look like?
Regarding the status, we're in the process of working with a vendor now to get under contract to manage the facility for us. The proposed dates of operation starting out will be Thursday, Friday, and Saturday from 7:30 to 3:30, and possibly open at other times and on the weekends for other activities that can generate revenue. And knowing that it will be successful, then we'll add additional days as we see the success of the market.
Okay, this will be not, obviously, there will be food items.
There will be food items.
What else
retail,
will you have?
Retail crafts and fresh produce.
What's a retail craft?
It could be T-shirts.
Oh, so not non-food items?
No, Jeff. T-shirts, trinkets.
Okay, gotcha.
Typical things. I guess the best way for me to relate, if you go to one of these cruises and you get off and you leave and you see the market and they've got the little
I got all that stuff.
Yeah, stuff folks come in and get.
I bought it. Yeah. Okay.
With regard to the fence.
What's the fence going to look like? Because I don't hope it's not distracting.
On the front of the fence, it will be, if I can give you a picture of the There'll be brick columns spaced out about 6, 7 feet apart, and then aluminum tip points on the front.
Yeah, kind of decorative, yeah.
Decorative. And 2 gates for entrances, and then the fence will go down along the sides. The back will be either a 6 or 8 foot wrought iron fence that separates the Housing Authority property from city property, and the Housing Authority intends to extend their fence further out on each side so that right now there's a pathway that residents can walk between the market and the funeral home, but that will be blocked off, so they'll have to walk around and get on the sidewalk. So there won't be an opportunity for anybody to walk through from the backside.
And what's the name of their facility that this backs up to?
That's Piedmont Home.
Cleveland
Cleveland Avenue.
Okay, all right. Thank you. Any questions, comments?
I'm going to let her make hers first,
Miss-
and I'm going
Miss
to make
Adams?
mine.
I know you. Mr. Brooks, good idea, good concept, but the wrought iron fence won't stop people that want to come through. I'm just telling you, because on University Parkway, the wrought iron fence between the neighborhoods that want to get across the street to Kimberly Park area, 20th Street, they just tear the fence down. And if that's the kind of fence that you're talking about, it must be a more sustainable fence, because if people want to get from one side of the street or off the sidewalk to somebody's backyard to cut through the Thurman, they just cut a section out or knock it out and go through. So I'm just hoping that we don't have that kind of fence, that this will be, with some substance, you know what I mean?
I can't say for certain, but I believe the fence on University is probably an aluminum type fence. We had experience with this in another area where we put up a chain link fence and spent considerable time fixing the fence, and we went to a wrought iron fence. You'd need a tank. And we realized that it's very difficult, so
Very good. Thank you.
we took that under consideration.
Thank you.
Yes, Ms. Burke, sorry.
Mr. Chairman and Vice and members of
Yeah.
the committee, we have been working hard to make sure that this will be a very nice place for people to want to come. In fact, some years ago, when we did the first study up there, it was indicated that it would be up near 12th and Liberty. It was going to be similar to what we're talking about. And what we've said with the Fairview, with the park, that some of these events may even flow over, because we'll be working, the vendor, hopefully, with the Recreation Department. And we're working very closely, Chief Roundtree is here with Winston-Salem Police Department to make sure that we're going to get the area so people will want to use the facility. They will feel comfortable and safe. And I'm very pleased that the Housing Authority, Mr. Woods, with his Cleveland Public Housing so close to it, we've joined together in a partnership with that fence, and of course we put some more screening up there for a shrubbery. It should be a very beautiful place, and I'm sure the city manager going to give a sigh of relief when we do all of this, because it's been some hard work. We've been up there so many times, and Chris Mack, who represents me, has been up there on occasions making sure we're trying to develop a relationship with the merchants up there so they can become stakeholders as well in this project. We'll be, I need to say this right now, have we done our Operation Impact from Patterson down to Liberty 15 and 16? Yes.
Yes, the Operation Impact was conducted last Wednesday, and I can get you the results.
And we're doing that to make the residents aware how important it is that relationship should be developed. And I thank you, Mr. Brooks, for your work.
Okay. Any other questions, comments? Yes, sir.
There had been, I'm recalling now, some questions about parking. And so that lot closes at a certain period of time and we lock that, correct?
Let me just address that when you get ready for the question. I'll give you the answer.
Because I'd heard that, I think it's the bikers who are across there wanted to know about being able to use some parking. And so I was just, have we already addressed that?
Yes, we have addressed that, and I believe Mr. Turner is working on where we will have actually some parking for the people who are going to be using. What we failed to do with this project, we failed to talk about parking. And so there is a need, and we're looking at a certain corner. I don't know what the progress is with that, Mr. Turner. Would you allow him to address that?
We're looking at a property the city is looking at for a condemned house and looking at putting a parking lot on it.
And it's nearby.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Good question, good comments. Okay, is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second.
Okay, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed likewise. We will then go to C7. If you could read it, please.
Resolution authorizing the city manager to enter into an agreement with Novant Health for the provision of employee medical services in the amount of $197,000.
Ms. Ruth, you want to kind of give us 2 minutes on what we're doing here?
Yes. Currently, the city has a number of medical services that it provides for employees: pre-employment drug screening, random drug screening, pre-employment physicals. We actually have a city facility that is a clinic where we employ 3 registered nurses, and we have a physician who actually oversees the work of those nurses. That's the medical director piece of this. And in addition, we also provide physicals for certified fire personnel who to make sure that they're up to NFPA standards. So we have a number of services that we provide. We've bid those services, and we've accepted bids for those. We considered 4, and we're recommending that Novant Health be the provider who actually provides those services for
Okay,
us.
could you go over again? You've got 2 nurses and I would say an administrative assistant, is that the correct title?
Yes.
And then a director.
Yes.
And
our director is a nurse.
Is a nurse.
Registered nurse. Mhm.
So we're talking 3 nurses and 1 assistant.
Correct.
Okay. And then the new thing you're recommending from Novant would have what kind of staffing?
It will be staffed exactly the same,
Okay.
with the exception of we will bring in a nurse practitioner who can actually do more than the nurses can, who can prescribe, diagnose, a step down, basically a step down from a physician. That would come in and be on staff and be on site half a day for 2 days a week for our employees to come in just as a walk-in clinic to take care of basically minor things that, like a strep test, something that a nurse couldn't do, but a nurse practitioner could.
Okay, and that is taking the place, because I have gotten some emails of the doctor that we use now for that?
No, we still have to have, we don't even provide that service now.
Oh, okay.
No, our clinic does very basic first aid, allergy shots, workers' comp injuries, or just reviewing workers' comp injuries and referring those out.
Okay.
Wellness, but not anything that requires a higher level of licensing.
Okay. So basically, this person would do what? This nurse practitioner would do what?
The nurse practitioner would come in and be on staff to see employees that are sick, that ordinarily might go to their doctor, or even go to their regular physician, but they would be here, but they would be able to go on site. So say an employee comes in and has a sore throat and a fever. They could go see the nurse practitioner.
And what would they do now if they had a sore throat?
They would call their family physician and
Okay.
try to get in to see the family physician and be gone whatever amount of time
Okay.
they'd need to be gone to do that.
All right. Any questions, comments? Question?
What other municipalities are doing this in the area?
I think probably the one that has the largest and kind of most state-of-the-art facility is Burlington. Burlington actually runs practically a full-scale medical clinic for employees, elected officials, and employee families. They have a doctor who's contracted on staff
Okay.
and a nurse.
Okay. Next question. When we decided that we wanted to do this, and we probably have, did we again talk to any of the stakeholders or our employees that are going to be a part of this to find out their feedback? Because when we change our systems or the process of a system, to me, it's our responsibility to let our employees or our customers, because they're our customers just like the citizens, as to what we're doing that will ultimately impact something in their life. Did we do that?
We did not ask employees whether they wanted to have a clinic, no.
Not necessarily wanted it, but information purposes, this is what we're thinking about doing, and, how do you feel about this? Can you give us some feedback? Because 9 times out of 10, when you involve the stakeholders and the customers, even though a decision has to be made, I just think it's important, just like we're doing with the healthcare review, that we get some other people at the table to help us make these decisions so that everybody doesn't always think that we're making these decisions in a vacuum. So thank you, Ms. Carew. Chair, I make a motion, if I can, to hold this in committee.
Okay, is there a time sensitivity to this?
There is not a time sensitivity
Okay,
to it.
I have no trouble with that, if that's okay with everybody. We'll continue for 1 month, is that okay?
That's fine.
Ms. Burke?
I did see, do I see the director of the program here? Who, is Ms. Oakley? Ms. Oakley, Dr. Oakley? You work with the program? Those 2 sisters back there looking alike, but but then it's another sister, right? Yes. The others, all right, so, yes, ma'am. You don't work with the program?
Betty's our health services coordinator. She actually runs our employee clinic.
Okay, I'm with the right one. Maybe she can also give some comments where people have talked with you to follow up what Mrs. Councilwoman said. I don't know if you have it today or not, or you want to. Do you have any information today, whether there's been any input from any of the, as Councilwoman Adams said, from our...
Good afternoon. Just briefly, I have been in that clinic for 20 years, and I have excellent rapport with the employees. I talk with them every day, and one of the vacuums that we have in our existing system is the inability to provide an assessment where there's a level of provider that can actually write a prescription. And so with the addition of a nurse practitioner coming in, that would be a tremendous service to our employees because they wouldn't have to pay a copay to see someone. The prescription is written right then, and they can shop around for the best place to get it filled. So we have not done a formal survey, but in general, we talk to them daily, and they tell us about their needs, and we feel like this would be something that would bridge the gap.
Yes, and Councilwoman makes a good point. That is what would be in that report that you just said. You do have that communication.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
Anybody? Yeah.
I had the question, and this is Ms. Carew. The actual responses to our proposals for each one of these listed, the 4 that were considered, is there any way that you can provide us with a copy of the specific proposal? I know you break it out in terms of certain things provided within them, but can you provide an actual copy of what they submitted in that? Because at the end of the day, I know the reason this has been questioned is because we got some requests, particularly from Firefighters Association, based upon some specific concerns that exist there. I think that's some things that are brought up are things that we do need to consider in the process of looking at who we actually select in this. So I think there's some legitimate things that we need to make sure we get some answers to.
Sure.
Okay, we're going to hold this in committee for a month. If anyone has any additional questions or comments, this is C7. If you will please communicate them to the city manager, Ms. Carew. That's okay?
Thank you.
All right. We will now go to C9. If you'll read that, please.
Consideration of items regarding the issuance of $3,945,000 in 2/3 general obligation bonds of the City of Winston-Salem, North Carolina. A, resolution of the City of Winston-Salem making certain statements of fact concerning proposed bond issue. B, introduction of bond orders. Do you want me to read all of those?
No.
Okay.
Ms. Sanders, Saunders, before you start, would you mind giving the committee a definition of what we mean by 2/3 bonds? Because there's a lot of talk about bonds in the paper and meetings that are getting ready to happen, and these are not those bonds. So will you please explain to everybody what these are?
2/3 bonds are a form of general obligation bond, and state law says that you can issue general obligation bonds, which are 2/3 without voter approval. They're 2/3 of your net debt reduction over a fiscal year that you can issue every year without voter approval, or every other year, excuse me, without voter approval.
So if we paid off $5 million in a certain year, the next year we could issue 2/3 of that.
That's correct.
So it it kind of ratchets down, but slower.
Right.
Okay. And these are going for projects that we have previously approved.
That's correct. They're part of the 2013-14 CIP.
And we traditionally issue two-thirds in even years, is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. Based on what we paid off in the odd years.
That's correct.
Okay. Yes, ma'am.
I do have one question. Thank you, Ms. Saunders. I think I saw in here the greens at Winston Lake. I thought that was in the budget last year, Mr. City Manager.
All these projects were in
We're in the
budget.
budget?
And
And this is how we were going to finance them by the two-thirds?
And many of them we've already moved ahead on. About a third, we've already spent the money. We use a spending reimbursement resolution, and so we want to get started. We wait till this time of year. It's the best time financially to do the two-thirds, and but these are all previously approved in the budget.
One more. Is this the only instance that we have the two-thirds general obligation bonds, or do we have others pending? Or is this it? This
Will
is
be
it?
every other year.
Every other year?
Yeah, this is it. The next time would be 2016.
All right. Move for approval.
Second.
Okay. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed likewise. We will now move to, I have C11 now. There are several different, bear with me a minute. There's a C11A and B and whatever. So we'll just take C11. You'll read that one, please.
Consideration of items related to the city's permitting process. A, resolution approving revisions to the city's permit issuing process. And B, ordinance amending various city code provisions to consolidate and streamline the applications and approval process for certain city permits and facilitate compliance.
Okay. If y'all can remember, we did, the staff has been looking at it for a while, how we can streamline the permitting process. Mr. Brooks, could you give us just a 2 or 3 minute explanation on this?
Yes, there was a committee of all of the parties, departments that are currently involved with that permitting process, and as a result of discussing the current way that it's processed, which would be intake in various departments, and then routing to various departments and an approval, it was determined by the committee that it would be more efficient and a more friendlier, customer-friendlier process if it could all, or as much as possible, be consolidated into one department. So as a citizen, you only had to make one visit to the city, and you would be able to apply for the various types of permits. So by consolidating them, we're able to achieve that. And then by using technology, they're able to go on the website, pull down an application, get instructions, click on whatever application they would choose to have. We also have the ordinances that's attached to each code, should someone care to read those. And then that routing process starts and will go through and ultimately come back to the department for approval. So we just believe overall that's a bit more of an efficient way to operate. So you're actually talking about streamlining and consolidating the intake and processing procedure. Along with that, we noticed that there were some city codes that needed to be revised. In order to accomplish that, the city attorney's office have reviewed the codes and made the appropriate revisions, and you have those before you. I think that's another item associated with that. So they have taken care of that. And along with that, the fees for the permitting process had not been reviewed or updated for, from my understanding, well over 10 years. So staff conducted a study of the surrounding cities, our sister cities, comparable cities, and based on what we saw they were charging for their permit fees, we've recommended increases in the fees that are still below what many of our sister cities are doing, but certainly more than what we have had in the past.
Okay. Any questions or comments?
I asked for this to be a pull. I think what we see here now is something good. I think when we came back before, there was not as much transition in terms of change. There were fewer that shifted over. And I asked the same question that I asked the last time we looked at this, particularly in the Community and Business Development Department, which is going to be shouldering the majority of some of the things shifting over. And that one question is making sure that you have the adequate staff to actually accomplish this process. And Do you?
Yes. Yes,
Okay.
we believe we have enough current staff to shoulder the increase.
And then the other question that I have is, and this may be a city attorney one, what is the tipping point from changing from open air meeting to picketing?
Good afternoon. It's basically based upon the way open air public meeting is defined. If you look at, I think it's 38.3. Which is on page 165. Open air public meeting has historically been defined as a public address, lecture, sermon, or discourse, or the conducting of a public musical or theatrical performance. And a picket basically is defined a little differently. Both of which can be First Amendment activities, but based upon the definition.
Okay.
So if Mr. Montgomery's church has a picnic and he preaches,
Open meeting,
what should he get?
open air.
Is it on city property?
Yeah, and it's probably going to be long-winded, too. You better get that open air.
It sounds like an open air public meeting, but I would have to look at all the factors
Okay.
involved to determine if the other is necessary.
Right. But I think at the end of the day that this provides a better efficiency for citizens in terms of being able to go to one central location or to two rather than how they were spread out. So I think staff's done a good job in this evaluation.
And we did add appeal processes to a number of the permits as well.
Okay, Ms. Burke?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, Vice Chair. I thought that we had been doing everything we possibly could to streamline these programs and to communicate more effectively with the citizens. I guess the mayor, as he was listening to this, when he was heading this department, we were talking about that, because we should not have our citizens wondering when and where, and then one department taking their time to get back with another department. I think that's, I would hope that, Mr. City Manager, we'd get some kind of report after so many months that they've been doing this.
Mm-hmm.
And also some of these things we have on the books here that's outdated. We've asked our law office to make sure that they are reviewing them. And this was something that we talked about a long, long time ago. And the reason this item took so long is because I took a lot of time to review multiple sections to make sure they were current, and were they were not current, deleted those or revised them.
Thank
Not
you.
only this one, but other chapters as well. Thanks, ma'am.
Thank you.
Jeff, I'm sorry, I skipped you.
No, that's fine. My question goes to the experience I had on the Development Review Committee, where the question came up from developers about paying for their permits and how different departments handle that in different manners. So when you're under the new proposal here, would you be able to pay at the time and place of obtaining all these permits, or do you have to go downstairs to the cashier and pay? And that was a sense of frustration amongst developers and not having a common way to pay for permits.
The payment of the, currently we take some payments in the office and then we take them down to revenue, or some go directly to revenue to pay. We can take a further look at that to see which would be the better option, either all in one place or continuing as we're doing.
I think a uniform way of doing that would be helpful to the citizens. I know I've definitely gotten that feedback on it.
Yeah, we would just have to give it careful review, and with the amount of fees that come in the summer, because during the summer months, the permits are fairly extensive. But we'll take a look at that.
Any other questions, comments? To have a motion to approve?
Move for approval.
Second.
All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed likewise. Last one is C12. Mr. Newman, if you'll come up, please.
Resolution approving a master high-speed internet network development agreement with AT&T.
Dennis, why don't you give us a 2-minute synopsis, if you can, of what this is?
Well, Councilman Clark, members of the Finance Committee, Mayor, what you have here is a proposal to enter an agreement with AT&T to develop a master network for the city. About almost a year ago, Council authorized staff to participate in an organization called North Carolina Next Generation Network. We refer to that as NC Engine. And one of the first things NC Engine did was issue a request for proposal to invite internet service providers to build out a high-speed network, we refer to as a gigabit network, into our communities. Participating in that included 4 universities, which Wake Forest University, North Carolina State University, UNC Chapel Hill, and who did I not say? Duke University. The municipalities include City Winston-Salem, Carrboro, Chapel Hill, Raleigh, Durham, and
Carrie.
thank you.
Carrie.
Carrie, thank you. There were 8 responses to the RFP, and amongst those responses, one that was considered was a offer by AT&T to build within our communities what we describe as a gigabit network. NC Engine had many discussions throughout the past several months with AT&T, coming to what we felt as acceptable terms, and all of that brought together into an agreement to build this network into our 6 communities. The agreement has both sides for the city and for AT&T in terms of commitments. AT&T is committing to build this 100% all-fiber network to the residents of the city of Winston-Salem as well as businesses. They will bring a network with speeds up to 1 gigabit per second as compared to the typical network we have into our homes today in the range of approximately 10 megabits, 15 megabit, the gig being almost 100 times faster. AT&T has not yet shared with us what the affordability of that network will be, but based on their prior build out and announcement, in particular in Austin, Texas, we expect that price to be very appealing. The network will include from AT&T some services to our community. It's very important to NC Engine, just as I'm sure it is to yourselves, that there be a component within the offering that does something to address the digitally disadvantaged. Towards that end, AT&T has committed a few items to the NC Engine participants as a whole. So I'll share a few numbers with you, but to understand those numbers will then be equitably distributed among the NC Engine members. They will provide free internet access, this is gigabit speed, to up to 100 community centers. They will provide the build out to small and medium-sized businesses, up to 100 businesses throughout the NC Engine communities. They will provide to our multiple dwelling units, apartment complexes that meet certain criteria for low-income housing. They will provide up to 10 of the larger multiple dwelling units, free access of low-speed internet connection for up to 7 years. And the last item that they will provide, which will be a cooperative decision between the city and AT&T, will be free wireless where it makes sense and where the city is willing to participate. There will be no cost to the city for any of the activities that AT&T will conduct in regard to the build-out of this network.
Do they need our permission?
No. But in exchange for what they're committing to do, what is important to AT&T, and in order to achieve what they want as far as a expeditious build-out of the network, they recognize the importance of the city being a partner with them, in particular as it relates to the permitting process and the construction of that network.
So we can assist in expediting
Correct.
review of applications and things of that.
Yes. In particular, they've asked the city to provide a 5 business day turnaround for permits that can practically be done in that time period. They're asking to be able to submit those permits electronically with electronic signature, which is not a problem. And they're also asking for one person within the city to be designated as their single point of contact. All of this designed to help expedite the construction process.
Okay, thank you. Any questions, comments, Jeff?
I just noticed here that the AT&T does say that key to rapid build-out is the role of the city providing right-of-way access. So I'm assuming that we'll be very cooperative in that. But I guess my other question is, I also noticed that the plan is to place the fiber above ground where currently services are above ground. Is there any way for us to stimulate more of that going underground? I mean, I know it's much more expensive, but if we have roadway projects, can we coordinate with them to maybe reduce our costs?
I think it would make sense. I think AT&T would want us to coordinate them with this new construction going on. I do believe that they're going to look at the most cost-effective way to distribute it, and where poles are available, that would be their preference. But where we are doing construction, and that makes sense, I think they'd absolutely want to do that.
Just very quickly, I just want to thank Dennis for his hard work on this. And you know, this is extraordinarily important for us as a community as we move forward as a knowledge-based economy to have this kind of a level of service. And we're also continuing to have discussions with another provider that may have two that could make it even more competitive and the city even more wired. So.
I do like the fact, and again, Mr. Newman, you and your staff, thank you for participating and making this happen. Because when we started talking about this as a council, our citizens need to understand we're trying to proactively move forward to get us engaged and connected to internet and everything else, that people, when they open not just their phones but their iPads and any other type of technology, that they can possibly have it here in the city. And I'm sure going forward we're going to be working, as the mayor said, with other contractors that can provide us resources as well. I did like the fact that the city council has the opportunity to review and select the sites that we're talking about putting in low-income or moderate housing or the communities of our city. I think that's great for us. And again, thank you and your staff for everything you've done with this initiative.
Okay, any other questions, comments? And I would like to personally thank, I see some of the AT&T folks here for stepping forward in the community. I certainly think we will do what we can to get that paperwork moved. Is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed likewise. Well, we have now finished the consent agenda.
We had a meeting.
By the way, in case is Miss Karen Perry still here?
Councilman
Clark, I apologize. I was reminded by the city attorney that there is one item I need to mention to you. There is a typographic error in the resolution, which refers to a 100 gigabit network rather than a 1 gigabit network. We'll make that correction when it goes to full council.
Okay, thank you. But I think that motion was made with that correction in mind.
Yeah.
It's a little bit better.
If Miss Karen Perry is still here, she, I think, was the attorney representing Abington Gardens. That was approved by consent. So if you're still here, we're glad you stayed around, but I forgot she was on the list up here.
It is.
It's already been approved from consent.
But you have a rezoning on that, so you can't really do the rezone, do the financial piece before the rezoning, so it'll have to be sent to the May 5th calendar as well.
Well, let me ask our city attorney, since we've already approved it, and this, I think, was the attorney that was here, since she has already left, if we move the meetings.
No, that was, hers was 5. This one is another one. This is in the northeast, what we talked about.
No, what I'm saying is a lady signed up for Abington Gardens, who I think was the attorney, and that was C4, and it was approved in consent without discussion.
For Miss Perry.
Because the lady that spoke on C3 said there was an attorney here for C4, but C4 was approved by consent, so I'm assuming this was the attorney. She's probably already left since her item was approved. I just wanted to be sure she wasn't still here.
We'll let her know, but I think because there is a rezoning item, a companion rezoning item, we're going to have to put that on the calendar to make this. We'll let her know.
Okay, thank you. I don't think it's an issue. I just noticed it.
But you need to do the rezoning.
Can't do one without the other.
Yeah. Well, it will, because this was on, Oh, okay, I see. You can't go next week. Okay. If you will get this piece of paper and if you'll give her a call.
I'll be happy to.
Okay. Okay, we are now on the Finance Committee general agenda, and we have 4 items. We'll just see how we work through all this. First one is G1.
Resolution approving economic development assistance to Polyvise in the amount of $75,891.
Mr. Page, you want to give us a
I'll be very brief. Chairman Clark, this item approves economic development assistance of approximately $76,000 over 9 years to Polyvise, which is a German-owned company, been around for over 150 years, looking to open a location in the United States. They manufacture a non-woven fabric that's used in automotive, home textiles, landscaping, geotech industries, and construction. They'll be creating 30 jobs and invest about $9.4 million over that 9-year period. Currently, they have about 350 employees located in Europe and had sales of about $96.6 million in 2013. What we're recommending is assistance that's equal to 50% of the net new taxes that be generated by the project over that 9-year period. Happy to answer any questions.
Any questions for Mr. Page? We did go over this briefly in closed session. Is there a motion to approve?
Move for approval.
Is there a second? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed likewise. We'll now go to G2. You'll read this, please.
Resolution approving revisions to the Revitalizing Urban Commercial Areas Program guidelines.
Mr. Brooks, you're back up again.
Earned his money today.
If you could give us a brief update on this, then we'll talk about it.
Yes, several months this item went before council regarding a particular loan, which was the Malone's Restaurant loan. And as a result of looking at that, council had requested staff to take a look at the overall guidelines for the RUCA program, because we believe that it was felt that the current guidelines possibly did not provide enough accountability and did not really satisfy looking and guarding not only the applicant's interests, but possibly the city's interests. So as a result of that, staff did take a look at the current guidelines, and as we stated at that time, we had attempted to start making some revisions, and we were just not as successful with those as we wanted to be. And unfortunately, we had the mishap with the restaurant. Since that time, we have gone through, we've done a thorough review, we've made some recommended changes to the processing that we believe adds more accountability and will just strengthen the overall program to make it more effective, not only for the applicant, but also protects the city's interests. And it basically provides just for a better processing of the application and providing the needed assistance, particularly to those applicants who are unsophisticated to the development process. In doing so, as I stated then, we believe that we should have a dedicated staff person to work in that particular program, because currently the staff that we're using for construction management are all on the federal payroll and monitor federal projects, and it's very difficult to take them away from that for any long length of time because of the stipulations and the requirements. But in this request, we have made a recommendation for an additional staff person that could devote their times to RUCA and the other development projects without creating an additional head count to the overall city family, and switch the funding source, because currently that position is being funded out of one of our federal grants, but in the grant we can create a position through the grant and continue to fund it and use the current position that we have and just switch the funding source. So we believe we have addressed the concerns that we, as we heard them, be prepared to answer any questions and move forward with getting this process started again.
I believe at the council meeting, it's been, I guess, 2 months now, when we discussed this, Mr. Bessie put several conditions on the loan approval. One was RUCA guidelines. I believe this was charged to the committee to do this. And if you'll just comment one more time, we're still using federal money to pay for the administrative position. We're simply using a different bucket of federal
No,
money?
what we're requesting is that we not use federal money and substitute that with general fund money.
So we are adding a city position.
We are utilizing city funds, but using a city position that's currently in the system and switching the funding source from federal to general
Okay,
fund.
but it's a new position dollar-wise?
New position dollar-wise,
Okay.
yes.
Okay. With that introduction, are there any questions, comments? I'll start with the committee first. Mr. Montgomery?
Mine is more of it's a concern statement. I think we're having guidelines is great, and I think we're going in the right course of having proper oversight over the program. My only concern is making sure that the guidelines do not negate the purpose of the program, understanding that it goes into areas that have issues, understanding that if there were certain conditions in those areas, then they would not need the assistance that many come to the city looking for, particularly in RUCA. And so my only thing is that when we look at this process, making sure that this does not prohibit the development, because I think out of all the projects we've had out of this, one that has caused an issue out of everything that's been successful out of the program, we don't want to put it in a position where it now goes backwards, but making sure we do have the guidelines and the oversight that are necessary. The one that says here in terms of owner's capacity to complete project based upon previous experience, does that mean that if a person is newly in ownership position of a commercial space and has never worked in that is going to be negatively looked at, or are we going to try to assist them with the technical assistance to actually do what they're looking to do?
Exactly, the latter. What we've attempted to do is have a two-track process. If you have a developer that's very experienced, they get on the fast track. If you have somebody that's not experienced, they need the type of technical assistance and hand-holding to get through the process, we can provide them with that. So it's intended to allow the person who's able to move on. The one that's not gets the assistance. Technical, yes.
Okay. Ms. Adams, you have a question?
Yeah, and I didn't see it in here, and it probably is somewhere. I saw that we probably have a designated person to help with this program. I think, again, I see they do the site visits, but I think we need to ensure we document everything that we're doing, such as, again, I go back to the visual aspect of pictures. I think when the person goes out to do the site, just like inspections does now, I think they need to take the camera, the phone, whatever, and there needs to be a picture. If they painted a wall and the wall looks good and it's ready to go, then you should be able to show me out of the scope of the work that before they painted this whole wall, this is what this wall looked like. In other words, what are the citizens paying for? We need, I trust the subject matter expertise of the person, but I also need documentation.
Yes, Councilwoman. Currently, we have in the housing programs a site visit log. On every visit, the construction advisor is required to document their findings, if need be, take photos. So we've written that in this process too. A minimum of 3 visits, probably will be more, but we've written some mandatory visits with proper documentation.
Thank you. And Mr. Brooks, I think that's a twofold. More so, it protects the persons that are utilizing the program more so than us. Unfortunately, some people, they think that we, don't do what we're supposed to do either. So this protects both the inspector or the person over the program as well as the persons that's utilizing the program. And I want to commend you and your staff for stepping quickly through this. And you guys did a great job bringing this back to us with all of the issues and concerns that we had. I just want to tell you, job well done.
Thank you.
Any other questions, comments? Mr. Bessie, this is your baby. Go right ahead.
Mine as well as others. This is certainly a step forward. One of the new conditions is that assistance would be available only to the owners of the property and not renters. In the existing RUCA areas, how many of our RUCAs have involved financial assistance to renters as well as owners?
In the RUCA 2 program, I believe we have 4 applications and 2 are with the property owner, and the other are with the tenant.
So 2 applications have been owners. So this would be a significant change in terms of the eligibility criteria.
It is a significant change on the eligibility. It provides an avenue for the loan to be more secure and for the city's interests, I think, to be better protected.
Was consideration given to alternative securities being made available by those renting facilities within the target area?
Yes, we looked at some alternative security, such as homes, automobiles, other types of possessions that one would have. Generally, on the lower end of the loans, that's acceptable, but once you get above 25, maybe 50,000, it's very difficult for particularly some of your smaller applicants who are the tenants to have that type of free security that's not already encumbered.
Without necessarily expressing an opinion whether it's a good or bad change, I would just note that I think it will change the way those projects can move forward, and leave it in members of the committee whether you want to consider that at greater length or approve the change.
Mr. McIntosh.
I just want to comment on that. I would imagine that the vast majority and the intent of these funds are to improve real estate. Therefore, leasehold improvements, a tenant comes and says, I want to improve the property for my period of tenancy, which accrues to the value of the building for the landlord. So it seems like in all these cases you would, if the tenant wants the improvements done, you would still strike the agreement with the owner. So the tenant gets what he wants in terms of improvements, city gets what they want in terms of security, landlord gets what they want in terms of the increase in value of the building. So to me that makes sense to route it that way.
Are you telling me there's only been 4 RUCA contracts? So maybe we got a list a mile long in this last batch.
It probably, I would rather understate than overstate. I'm sure
Somebody, it's a lot more than 4 is what I'm getting at. Evans, are you coming up to?
He's wrong.
I think he's correct, though, Chairman Clark, that about 30 to 40% of them are probably tenant as opposed to property owner.
Okay. Yeah, but it's more than 4. Okay. Yes, ma'am.
I was just going to say, I think it looks a little skewed because, for example, West-Salem Shopping Center is all under one owner.
Yeah.
Multiple units, so that may be part of what makes it look that way.
I think that Councilman Bessie raises a very pertinent point in that because, again, looking at RUCA, revitalizing urban commercial areas, yes, there is a increased tax value on the property, but the larger goal is to help create a buzz in terms of commercial opportunities within that area, particularly areas that have not seen the commercial activity that is there. And so if you have a tenant who is wanting to make investment and improve areas, but you have an owner who is not willing to participate in the process in terms of being on the hook on this side for the responsibility of that, then how do we encounter that? You don't get that investment the same way that we were looking at on the other side, but understanding how we secure what is necessary is another question. But I don't think that it adequately states in terms of those individuals specific to who are the lessors in is that right? Lessors? Yeah. Of the property. And so that does bring, in terms of just a question that for me poses a little bit of heartburn and just how we approach that specifically, because I think looking at the property owners is absolutely something that I think that's a no-brainer. But then on the actual individuals who are going to be the tenant, I think that access is something that should be considered in that process? Because again, if you have the tenant who's wanting to go into that property and wanting to make some investments in the property, it does increase the value of that for the owner, but do we have any timeline requirements on the leases that they execute with the owner? Is there a certain time frame for the amount of money that's being invested, in the sense of if you're doing a certain amount of money, it needs to be a company with a 10, 5, any of that goes along with that?
We have not involved ourselves with the negotiations in the past between the relationship between the tenant and the landlord, their agreement. We've only concerned ourselves, of course, with the agreement between the city and the tenant on the lending of the funds. If it's the desire of the committee for us to take a further look at finding a way to continue to work with the tenant and being able to have some adequate security for loans that are made to tenants, I'm certain we can probably attempt to do that and bring something back to you. And I would suggest, if you're satisfied with what you've heard, that you allow the program to move forward, and we will get that information to you.
And because the point in the sense of the tenant and the owner there is just that ability for that tenant to still be able to have that access. And my only thing is now is that if you have a tenant come in, you make those improvements, but they only sign a year lease, then it's a question of you made this large investment and you only have a year lease. What's to say that the property owner isn't going to say, well, we made these nice improvements and, we're going to find somebody else to take the space. So that's a concern. And I would ask council to consider something.
Certainly, I was going to make the same argument that you just did, that we've seen the result of a tenant getting into the loan process and ending up in in conflict with the owner. Certainly, I think that scenario that you just mentioned is there, that any tenant who puts themselves on the hook without the owner taking responsibility is asking for trouble. So I'm very much in agreement with the contract having to, it has to do with the owner and not a tenant.
Just to go to that, one of the terms here is for the submission to include a business plan. Part of that business plan would be how long is the lease, how long are we amortizing the costs over. I think that could be stated a little more explicitly, but I would think that would be something you would review before you cut a check to somebody.
And I would say, as someone who has leased property, you always worry about leasehold improvements because they stay with the building.
Yep.
And so you better, if it's got a 2-month payback, you don't mind doing it with 1 year left on your lease, but if it doesn't, then you got issues.
Now, I was going to say that's a very strong point you bring up, because since some of these people don't have the technical skills and don't really know, and they're anxious to get in business, they go in blindly.
Yeah.
Two comments from the chair. First off, I think it would be helpful, I know y'all give us an update on the projects, to just say if it's a tenant or an owner.
Okay.
So we can put that in perspective. My big concern is we're creating a new job, and I can't believe we need a whole person just to do construction administration, I guess this is. Basically, they're going to go out and see if the work's been done, right?
Yes, for the RUCA, you've got the downtown loan program, the NRSA.
Okay, so it's not just RUCA.
No, there are several programs that are non-federally funded that we can utilize that position for.
All right. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
I've heard a number of comments. Is there a consensus among the committee chairman, the committee members on what y'all would like to do here?
Chairman, excuse me. We do have Ms. Oakes, the owner of Malone's Restaurant, and her attorney, Ms. Ryan. And if you recall, at the time, they were into a lawsuit with each other, and that lawsuit has been settled. If you care, to hear from her with respect to the settlement?
That would be fine. Whoever would like to come up, please come up.
Unless they want to.
What's that?
Just, excuse me, I'm to make a comment. Don't reveal anything that would end up a problem.
Certainly. Good afternoon. I'm Susan Ryan. I'm an attorney at Craig Brawley, Lipford and Walker. Our address is 110 Oakwood Drive here in Winston-Salem. And I am pleased to say that the landlord and the tenant have reached an agreement. They have signed a settlement agreement. They have signed a new lease that provides much more definitive and clearly stated obligations for both parties through this lease. To the question about the term of the lease, it is a 10-year term renewable at the tenant's option for an additional 10 years. And with this, we have also dismissed the existing lawsuit.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, we needed to hear that.
Thank you all.
Any questions for the attorney?
I don't have a question, I just have a comment. It's not with the attorney.
Okay, thank you. If you wouldn't mind holding in case there's any other questions that come up.
Certainly.
Thank you. Yeah, Ms. Burke.
The comment I would like to make, if we'll go back to having more technical assistance, and if we had, we wouldn't be in the situation we're in. So that position Mr. Brooks was talking about can be very beneficial if everything we are saying about it and each party become accountable. Thank you.
Okay.
And I want to thank Mr. Oakes and appreciate the manner in which she carried out the responsibility of feeling that we were not quite doing all we should have been doing. Thank you, Ms. Oakes.
Okay, is there a motion by any of the council members? Committee members?
Move for approval.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? No. Abstaining? It passes 3-1, and it'll go to the council meeting next week, which is April the 21st. Okay, let me pause a minute. At 6 o'clock, we're supposed to be finished. We have 2 items left. One is just a report on the MWBE disparity study, and the other one happens to be, I think, the handout that we have here on the budget.
Right.
Kind of where we are. How much time can you give us, Mr. Chairman, of the next committee meeting?
Mr. Chairman, the only thing I want to say is I believe there are a number of people here who wish to be involved in an issue for public safety. We advertise 6, so let's stay as close as possible to that.
Okay. I think the disparity study could slip a month. Lee, I would think we need to go over this since you're going to have a budget to us.
That's correct.
If it's okay with the committee, I'll keep the disparity study in the committee, and we'll try to be finished by, for those folks that are here, by 6:15.
Good evening, Chairman Clark, Mayor Joins, members of the City Council. I'm going to move quickly through this presentation. Might even skip a slide or two. There's basically 3 parts to it, kind of give you an update. There's information about the results from a market pay study that we've performed, and then there's a supplementary section that provides just some additional detail and some information about some of our other funds. As we were working on the, have been working on the budget, some themes have emerged. The first one on the revenue side, the impact of the exclusion of proprietary software from the property tax base. That certainly is one pressure. Looking to maintain our competitive employee compensation. Looking at limited replacement of equipment, increased funding requests from community agencies, and then lastly, potentially a proposed use of fund balance to continue investments in information technology and to address unfunded capital needs. Just very quickly here in this particular slide, right now the gap that we're looking at is $2.4 million, $177.9 million in expenditures versus $175.5 in revenues. As I mentioned, really part of that is the impact on the tax base from the exclusion of proprietary software. Right now it's probably between $300 to $400 million of impact to the base. So the base overall has gone down about $400 million from the current fiscal year.
Are you comfortable with that assumption?
Well, the county has been giving us tax-based estimates since March, so this is based on their April estimate. They'll give us one more estimate in May, and that one will probably be the one that we'll kind of lock in for the budget.
Thank
so
you.
hopefully it'll improve. I mentioned in terms of budget pressures, the revenue piece there, $2.1 million right now. On the expenditure side, the outlook does include a 2% merit pay increase for employees at about almost $2.2 million. We've added $1 million in lease payments for the replacement of equipment. And then finally, we've also added about $450,000 for vehicle maintenance, knowing that we haven't been replacing equipment at a rate that is really bringing those costs down. So in terms of how we right now are looking to close that $2.4 million gap, what we're looking at right now is an increase in the tax rate of 1 cent to offset the proprietary software exclusions. That's about $1.9 million. And then on the expenditure side, make some reductions in departmental operating budgets, about $350,000. Part of that would include eliminating 8 positions in the sanitation department as a result of buying the automated side loaders that enables us to reduce those crews from 3-person operations to a 1-person operations. So those positions are vacant, but that would yield about $200,000 of the $350,000. And then finally, reducing the current budget contingency by $100,000.
What is the budget?
What was your question, Molly?
What is the budget contingency?
Right now, the council approved about $200,000 as part of the 13-14 budget, just to have some funds available if certain needs arise. The council has used that for the gun buyback program, for providing funding to IDR.
Okay.
Also looking to some proposed uses of fund balance. For operations, $2 million, which is what we've been budgeting over the years. It really it's reflective of trying to be conservative in our estimating revenues and expenses. We don't intend to use that amount. We also are proposing to use quite a bit, about $1.45 million for PAYGO capital needs. This list we provided to the council back at the February 24th Capital Needs Committee. So some kind of major maintenance needs that are smaller in scope that we think we could use some of our fund balance to address. Also proposing to use $750,000 to start work on the new work order management system, the electronic plan review project. $300,000 would also come from the water and sewer fund. Also the replacement of our TV-13 video production equipment. Half of that, $100,000 would come from general fund, and then another $100,000 would come from our cable franchise fee fund. We have about a $100,000 balance in that. And then finally, just a small amount potentially for the bond referendum. That would be what we would be paying the Board of Elections to add the bond referendum to the ballot. So that's about $4.3 million use of fund balance. In terms of what that would do to our fund balance, this is kind of a projection for what the fund balance would be at the end of this fiscal year. It would go down from a total of $50.2 million to $45.2 million. That's because of the $1 million we're estimating we may use for this fiscal year, but also then the $4 million that we've transferred, that we're transferring to the Health Benefits Fund and the Workers' Comp Fund. But with all the other adjustments there, the increased reserve requirement, the increased fund balance appropriation, we would have undesignated fund balance of $2.5 million, which is a reduction from the $10.1 million we had at the end of fiscal year 12-13.
Ben, let me ask you a question. The money we transfer to the employee benefits area, what do those fund balances go under? Is that under restricted or reserves, or is that not on this page?
No. It's not on this page. It's just basically the end of year 13-14 assumes that those funds have been moved out. That's why overall the fund balance goes from 50.2 down to...
So those restricted ones are not on this page at all?
But we still have the money. It's just in a different fund.
Understand, yeah. Okay, thank you.
Well, my laptop's misbehaving there. Okay. The next couple slides, I want to share with you what we have received in terms of requests from community agencies. As mentioned earlier, we've got the sub-grantee agencies that are funded with the federal housing funds. These are requests that we've funded from either the general fund, the occupancy tax fund, housing finance fund. In terms of general fund, the total amount there that's been requested is almost $948,000. It's a 24% increase. That's about a $180,000 increase. On the next slide there, occupancy tax, an increase in the request from Winston-Salem. Housing finance fund, an increase from Harry VCOS. and then several new requests that we've received, totaling about $190,000. So bottom line, just based on the requests, the request amount is almost $1.4 million, which is about a 62% increase on what we're budgeting this year. These requests are not reflected in the budget outlook right now. They're not, what we have in the budget outlook right now is just the same amount of funding that's in the current year budget. But we wanted to share this with you all just as part of this update.
Okay.
The next several slides are about the results of our market pay study, and Ms. Caruth is going to go through that with you.
Okay, we conducted a market pay study that had really two objectives. One was to determine whether or not there are disparities between city salaries and our hiring markets, really for the purpose of looking at how competitive we are and any issues that we might be setting ourselves up for regarding recruitment and retention of employees. The methodology that we used for the study was to compare entry-level pay with entry-level pay in our hiring markets, and to compare average salaries with those, and to look at our pay plan, a point that we call market MRP, market reference point, which is where our pay plan says the market is, what the marketplace pays for that job. Basically, does our MRP really reflect what the market pays for the job? We looked at local governments primarily because the jobs are similar and because the compensation and benefit systems are similar. Out of the 336 jobs in the city, we studied 116 of them. Those were benchmark positions. A benchmark position being a position that practically every jurisdiction has, and the position is kind of an entry position, and other positions are tied to it. An example of how that works is on the next slide. The position that we're looking at is civil engineer. If you look at the positions that are below that, capital projects engineer, solid waste operations analyst, and utility services coordinator, those positions are not, the benchmark position is civil engineer. Those other positions require similar knowledge, skills, and abilities. The scope and complexity of the work that those positions do is similar to civil engineer, have similar decision-making abilities, and the organizational impact of decisions made by those positions are very similar to civil engineer. So in our pay plan, all of those positions are classified the same as civil engineer because of all those factors. So for this study, the benchmark position would have been civil engineer. And
keep going.
Okay, is civil engineer. And if you look in the box to the right, on our pay plan, this entry level for civil engineer is $46,350, and our market rate in our pay plan for that job is $51,500. If you look to the left, the blue arrow, that tells you what those two levels are within our hiring markets. So our entry is slightly higher for that position, but our market rate in our pay plan is lower than the average that is paid in the market for that job.
Okay. Do me again on the market.
The market rate, you're asking what it is. It's the point in our pay plan where we say if a person is making that amount of money, that is what the market rate for that job is. So when people start out, they don't start out at market rate, they start at an entry rate. And the goal is to move them to the market rate, which says that they are kind of whole. They are whole in terms of what the market would pay for that job. So what this says is that for this position, our market rate is not what the average actual pay is in the market.
Mr. Montgomery, your question?
It was just based upon that number. And so what we use in terms of getting that data, is that based specifically on what other government entities pay at that level, or was it also private entities including that?
On the next slide, I'll show you. We looked at these governments, and we also looked at some data from both public and private employers in North Carolina as well as in the Piedmont region. We did not look at data on every single position from each of these jurisdictions. It just depended on, because not all those jurisdictions have the positions that we looked at. So if the position was in the pay plan in the jurisdiction, we looked at the data for that. Okay, so the next slide tells you what we found. The first bullet point really goes to the question of how competitive are we in hiring? What are our entry-level pays compared with entry-level in the market? And what we found is that 24% of the employees in our organization are in positions where the entry-level pay is below that of the market. The second question gets to the question of our market rate and our market rate in our pay plan. How does that compare to the market rate, to the average actual salaries for those market comparisons? Again, what we found is that 58% of our employees are in positions where the market rate of pay in our pay plan is below the average actual that's paid in the market. In addition, related to that, what we also found is that 45% of actual salaries are below that internal market rate of pay number. So when you look at our pay plan and what we say the market is for a specific job, 45% of our employees are actually paid less than that.
Okay, Dee Dee had a question.
I'm sorry? No, that number tells you what percentage of our employees are in jobs where the MRP itself, that's about our pay plan. Our pay plan MRP is below the average, what's paid in the market in 58% of the jobs that we have. But when you look at actual salaries, am I confusing you? Does that make sense?
A little bit, but go ahead.
I'm not confused. I know what you're talking about. And I'm skipping ahead of you to the next slide.
Okay.
The information that you've given us on the market salary comparisons, and it has in parentheses base salary without the education incentives.
Mm-hmm.
When we see this again, or if you can get us the information, I'd like to see with the education incentives included in it. Also, I'd like to see, I see jobs, but I'd also like to see our management staff's jobs, meaning the jobs, and it is what it is, guys, what pays the money. I'd like to see where we are against the market for that as well. If a person's making six figures, we're paying them. I'd like to know what their market price is outside of that. And these are good, but I need to see a cross-section of all of us, not just, these.
Okay.
Thanks.
And then the last point is that 79% of actual salaries are below the average actuals for the market.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, Ms. Burke.
And looking at this, a person would say, it's a shame that we're doing what we're doing. But are we doing anything else to compensate the employees?
Yes.
And I think that's what we need to know about.
And that is the way, I know a lot of people, and not saying that we can't do enough, we can do more, but we need to see all of the factors that we see when we're in management or private sector. I need to know if I'm providing benefits, other perks, and they are perks, phones, cars, whatever, that needs to be built in there as well. And it's not a salary, I understand that, but I need to see if the person with a master's degree is making X dollars and the person has a BS degree. I need to be able to see the educational breakout as well, whether that makes a difference.
And Mr. Chairman, just as we train our fire and police, all that we invest in them from the beginning. We need to see all of that.
Okay.
All right.
Keep going. Oh, Dan, sorry.
I'm interested in your market study. You have listed on page 14 a fairly sizable number of jurisdictions. Are you saying that the data is the average of all of these jurisdictions that have comparable positions?
If they have comparable positions, it's the average actual pay for that position.
So take fire captain, for example. That would be the average of each of these markets that has a fire department and fire captains.
Yes.
Did you give any consideration to actual competitive areas for these positions?
Well, actually, we did. We looked at some large jurisdictions and some smaller jurisdictions, like Charlotte, for instance. The salaries are obviously much higher. But what you find when you look at the data is that in some of the smaller jurisdictions for some of the positions, the salaries we're still not competitive with some of those. So, but yes, we looked at a pretty broad cross-section.
The reason I ask that is that some of the data here in terms of the market salary comparison on pages 16 and 17 seems to cut against anecdotal evidence that I hear about specific positions, and I wonder if there is a possibility that in some of those anecdotal accounts we're dealing with nearby markets that are in fact higher than the average that you get looking across the board of the larger number of evaluated.
Quick question. Yeah. Okay, Al, the mayor had a question.
Just real quick, follow up on Dan's point there. I assume we made sure that, let's say, the city of Burlington's definition of responsibilities of a fire captain is X, and our definition is X as well, that they line up.
We have tried to pull positions that are truly comparable.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, keep going.
Okay.
I got to be finished by 6:15. So.
Okay. This slide shows you
Good luck.
entry-level compensation, and it is base salary without education incentives. So, for instance, the police officer position is a police officer with a high school education, and so forth. So these are basic, like I said, basic benchmark positions that we've looked at. We also, so what you see there is essentially the variance in the pay. The one I think that is for us in this list is pretty significant is equipment equipment operator, because we really do, that's one of those where we do see that impairing our ability to recruit for those. We also see retention issues in that area. So let me move to the next one, which looks at average actual compensation, and this shows you for all of those positions the average actual salary for our employees compared with average actual for the market. And you can see the variation there. The question that we ask ourselves is, what does that mean for turnover? And so we looked at the turnover rate for each of those positions. We didn't look at overall turnover, we looked at voluntary turnover. So it doesn't include retirements, it doesn't include promotions, and it doesn't include terminations. It includes only those people who just decided to leave and go elsewhere. And you see the turnover rate there. Again, equipment operator light is we see quite a bit of turnover in that area. And an IS analyst as well, that's primarily because it's just a very competitive industry.
Okay, thank you.
To put that in context, our overall turnover for voluntary turnover rate is 8%, and the voluntary turnover rate among state jurisdictions is about 8% as well. Okay. This just gives you a little bit more turnover information. These are the top jobs that we see, the top jobs for voluntary turnover. So the max is, fleet technician, forensic services tech. Again, there are a variety of reasons why those jobs turn over. Not all of it's pay. It's just a variety of reasons.
If I could, because I am way over my time, if I could just say, folks, you got the handout. Lee, I believe you are meeting with all the council members. Do you normally do before the budget?
Yes.
During the budget season?
If you could give me 1 minute, I'll just tell a couple quick things
Okay,
about
go
it.
ahead. I didn't mean to cut you off, but I'm getting ready to get thrown out of the room.
First of all, by the end of the week or early next week, we will be sharing with council and interested citizens and employees all of the data, the details for every position. Okay. That information, we'll have that. We just put a summary together for this meeting. But the punchline here when you get to the end is that, and you'll see we've got some options there of different ways we might look at doing some market adjustments. But the bottom line is the budget already is only balanced with a 1 cent tax increase because of what the state did to us, stole from us. So we already have a 1 cent tax increase to balance the budget with the base merit. So anything that we were to do additional for market pay, as well as anything significant that we were to do for grantee agencies, you saw there was a lot of requests for grantee agencies, would take an additional tax increase. So, but you will be talking to each councilman and the mayor.
All righty. Real quick.
That's based upon if we execute those initial recommendations.
Yes, and you could obviously cut something out of the budget, cut merit out, cut out a program.
And one thing I know we're pressed on time, but specifically as I look through these options, and we're looking at one, there's one in particular to me, and I'll ask, what is the living wage in Winston-Salem? What is the living wage in Winston-Salem?
It's $10.10.
It's about $10 an hour.
About $10.
Per an individual.
And for me, in terms of option D, which is here specifically in setting a floor to our salaries, I think that's something important as we look at being able to build up. If you don't have a floor, at least where you're starting at, that makes it difficult on the other side of that to even begin to make sure that you're hitting those things. So that's something I think that's important for us to consider in terms of at least setting a floor for all of our salaries in the city, particularly those lowest pay points. I think it's something that we need to take a look at. I know we'll have some additional conversation, but that's something that is very important to me as we look at this budget season.
Okay. Yes, ma'am.
Yes, just an announcement. We've started meetings in the different wards for the bond education for the referendum. We've already had one. We're going to have one Wednesday in the Northeast Ward, but we want our citizens to know that the information of where their meetings are, if you didn't get it vis-a-vis mailing, you can find it on the website. You can see it on Channel 13, and you can look at all of the print media to find that information, and we're asking you to please go out and become engaged in this process. Another one, and I'm sure the city manager will do, these dates, please have them inputted into all of our calendars.
Okay. We're adjourned.
Public safety will start in 5.